One topic that is very much debated in the current global economic debate is about whether eventually machines will completely replace um, human labor. So here I'm first reporting a table that reports the levels of capital per worker across industry in the United States over time. It's interesting to see that I've here. This is a table that is present also in the book, and it's interesting to see that first of all, the level of capital per worker in the economy seems to be varying quite substantially across industry. For each date we picked, we see that we have a very large amount of variation across industries of how much capital is needed per worker. The apparel sector seems to be a sector that doesn't use a lot of capital for each unit um, of labor that is employed, while, for example, the oil sector seems to be a sector that is extremely capital intensive if we want to adopt the language that we have introduced in our previous slides. The other interesting point is that for each industry that I'm reporting here, the amount of capital per worker employed in production has been steadily growing, suggesting that the value of capital that has been introduced, that is used in production relative to the amount of labor, has been going up over time. We can see this fact in particular reflected in the average level of capital per worker across all the industries in the US economy. It goes from about $15,000 per worker to now 47,000 in 2000, $47,000 per worker. So in about 40 years, it tripled. The statistic tripled its value. One interesting example that we're gonna look in one reading is the example of a company that is based here in the Bay Area, which is Uber. Uber, I'm sure everybody has heard of it or has taken an Uber in their lives in this class, seems to be introducing the goal of having more and more self-driving cars. So the idea is that progressively, if the technology is successful, Uber is going to replace human drivers and have self-driving cars based on extremely sophisticated GPS technology. And a pilot for this project has already been started, as the article describes, in Pittsburgh, where Uber is collaborating with Carnegie Mellon University, developing the technology together that will allow for these self-driving cars to be actually working. So right now they're in a pilot phase in which a human driver is actually present and has to drive, for example, on bridges because of the technology that maps the streets and all the possible obstacles on the road is not yet good enough to recognize bridges which have a lot of open spaces around, and so the software is having a lot of problems to the update in real time of the map of the street. But anyway, it's likely that these technological constraints will probably disappear in a little bit. It's probably true that the computer engineers and the coders that are behind this project will eventually figure it out, and Uber will finally have only self-driving cars. Now, the question is, the question and probably also the concern is, will we get to a point at which labor is not necessary anymore. And so, will we go through a transition in which labor is extremely suffering from having lower and lower demand, which, as economists, we know means lower and lower wages? A research article that I have reported in the next slide talks exactly about these kind of issues.